Hey everyone, welcome back to D Squared Stories, an audio fiction podcast bringing you short serialized weekly stories. We are now in the final chapter of Wonderful Baking Lodge. In lieu of doing another shout-out today, I would just like to reiterate the thanks to Vicky Pham, Bunbo Bay, Cooking Therapy, and Runaway Rice for the inspirations used in the past few chapters. One other item of importance. As you've probably noticed, this series takes light inspiration from the likenesses of a handful of real-life people in the name of parody. It feels important for today's chapter to say ultimately no one in this series is truly meant to be a reflection of any real-life person. This piece of fiction is just that, a piece of fiction. With that ominous foreshadowing out of the way, let's get into a quick recap and get started. Last time, Samantha and I nearly managed to get the whole competition called off, but had to settle for Peter sitting on the sidelines. During the chocolate challenge, I was absolutely lambasted as the production team did all they could to raise the temperature in my corner of the kitchen. Narrowly, with Dylan and Samantha's help, I pulled through. But unfortunately, Samantha paid the price and lost. In the next challenge, they sabotaged almost all of my ingredients and I was doomed to fail, up until Dylan knowingly sacrificed himself, ruining his own bake and getting me over the finish line and out of this nightmare once and for all. Chapter 5. How about them apples? Camera flashes bombarded me as I stood on the courtroom steps, Leah holding my arm locked tightly in hers. I shuffled my index cards that I spent so long preparing. But with the flashes leaving themselves burned into my vision, I put them down. I would go off the cuff for this. Today, we brought charges against the production team of beloved television show The Wonderful Baking Lodge, I said. What was once a wholesome program showing the best amateur bakers our nation had to offer was corrupted at some point into a sick experiment in gratuitous death and coercion. I stand here now hopeful in our legal system that everyone who fell victim to this charade will get their justice. I paused my statement to loud voices calling out questions one after another. I lifted my finger into the air, waiting for them to all settle down before I called on one of them. Yes, you? To what level are the two celebrity judges, Peter Broadway and Penelope Lay, involved in the orchestration of this dastardly scheme? At this point, I said, no charges have been officially made, but the authorities are still working through their investigation and will be bringing individual charges as needed. Next question. The crowd went weirdly silent. I saw a man in a hoodie raise his hand. You there. Could you take off your hood? Yeah, he said. I just wanted to ask after everything I did for you, why did you let me die? I jumped back as Dylan's face appeared from behind the hood. I felt myself get tugged back by my arm. I looked up trying to see Leah's reassuring face, but instead I saw Samantha. Honey, you let us all down. Ah! I woke up in a cold sweat in my cabin room. Oh, holy guacamole, in the worst possible way. A bit surprised it took this long for the nightmares to start, but sadly I think this was only the first of many. I washed my face off with some cold water and looked up at it. I mumbled to myself. I'm still here. I can still fight. Yesterday, after Dylan was escorted out, it was a relatively anticlimactic set of events. The production team looked stunned and disappointed that I was still around. They muttered to one another out of earshot of me. Their dismay and disarray at failing to eliminate me in time for the finals was the only thing I could use to keep myself going. The fact that I, the one cockroach they could not manage to stamp out, was still around to be a thorn in their side, that became my mission for staying alive. I decided to go for a morning walk. In any other situation, I imagined myself making it here. To the finals of the show, I thought I would be holed up in my cabin, practicing from dawn until dusk. It seemed rather pointless, though. I needed Marcus to flop if I had any hope of winning this thing. And I was really not sure what winning brought me at this point. I almost finished my lap around the area, having waved enthusiastically to every person on the production team just for the purpose of being in agitation. I noticed right before I had completed my circle that Dylan's door was open. That was strange. It wasn't when I started this loop. I remember looking longingly at it and wondering what they would do with the stuff of the people who lost. I guess now was as good a time as any to check. I walked up to the door and let myself into the cabin. Surprisingly, nothing seemed to be touched. I scanned the room until I jumped, as I got to a table and two chairs in the corner. Have a seat, Peter said, and close the door. My heart raced, and I thought about running out of the door and slamming it behind me, but what good was that? I did as he said and closed the door and took a seat. The windows allowed just enough light to get through in spite of the curtains. Peter held out a bottle of whiskey towards me and passed a glass. Want a drink? He asked. My guy, it's 8 in the morning. As if his motions were predetermined, he poured me a glass anyway and slid it across the short table between us. He took a big swig from his glass and looked up at where the light came into the room. "You're a funny one, you know that?" he said. "When I first found you in that execution room, my thought was... Well, no. My first thought was I need to start offing these incompetent morons to set an example. My second thought, though, was I don't need to do anything about her because she's going to have a full-on mental breakdown." My hands gripped the table, and I felt my eyes lock onto his cold, piercing blue ones as he so casually admitted to being involved in an elaborate mass murder plot. "But then you slid through to the next round. I tried to get you kicked out in round 3, but Penelope was not having it." "So, she's not in on it?" I asked. "Of course not. Mrs. Everyone's favorite grandmom? You think she'd be okay with murder?" "I mean, I don't think off the bat that anyone should be okay with murder." Peter stroked his chin. He took another drink. "Fair enough. Anyway, you derailed my monologue. Where was I? All right. And then in round 4, you did your shenanigans with switching the breads. That was when you made it personal. Because that's when you got in the way of my fun." "Oh, I bet Cheyenne is real fun." "Shut it and let me finish. Then you almost had us in a jam with that boycott nonsense. That really riled up everyone. You see, they don't normally care who wins or loses. It's all just bodies to them. But that right paved them off. But still, in spite of the whole crew sabotaging you, you still limped your way over the finish line to where you are now. All this to say, you are one tough nut to crack." "I had the help of some great people to get me here. People you killed." "Ha, great people. That's pretty rich." I stood up from the table and scowled at him. I wanted to pick up the drink he poured for me and toss it back in his face. "Yeah, great people. Great people you decided had lives that weren't worth living." He drank again. "Well, at least you understand the general motive of what makes this fascinating." "I really don't. Would you care to explain it to me, Mr. Broadway?" "You do, though, really," he said, looking wistfully off into the distance as if daydreaming. "This whole thing started because of a fascinating idea. I had a stroke a few summers back. You might have read about it in the papers." It was ringing a bell for me. He did not wait for me to confirm it, though, before continuing. "It was pretty bad. At points there was talk of me not coming back exactly as I was, but it ended up being not as bad as expected. There was a lot of talk about what to do if I wasn't all right, though. Blokes were getting ready to draft in memoriam statements for me at the network. It was in that moment I realized it would make a big impact on the world if I died." I continued to stare at him, not at all following his logic. "That gave me that aforementioned idea. Were the people so unimportant I could kill them with impunity?" He followed that up with a big swig of his drink. He laughed a little at the thought, as if remembering the moment fondly. "I talked a couple of the head producers into it, gathered a few staff members to make it happen. We grabbed a fella from his season who got outed early. He was a real loner type, not a lot of family. We used that same setup you walked in on. Well, minus some quality of life improvements we made as we learned more. I recorded the thing on a camcorder. That felt like a stupid idea at the time, but it ended up being vital. Do you know why?" I stared at him aghast with my mouth hung open with a kind of horror that I had no words for. He shook his head and waved his hand dismissively at me. "Never mind. It's because that's how you keep others roped into it. They can't turn tail if they're on video doing it. Their lives are as good as over if they turn on me. But now they can rope other people in. By the 2nd or 3rd season we did it, we had most of the production team in on it. And just as I predicted, we got away with it. Car crash excuse here. One with a stove. That was the key. You always had to have a reason to explain the burns. But otherwise, electrocution was hard to identify as a cause of death." "You're a sick, screwed-up monster," I shouted. "Am I, though?" he asked, so nonchalantly. So few people cared to look any further into it. It was just as I hypothesized. My life mattered, and theirs did not. Hardly anyone missed them. This season we were looking to up the ante, go for 2, maybe 3 people. You started us down a much different path, though." I slammed my fist into the table, hurting me more than making the threatening impact I hoped it would make. "I didn't do anything. I didn't make you do anything. Stop trying to pin this on me." "Aye, but you did. You told Maya, so we had to get rid of her. We lost your audio feed at one point during Challenge 3, so we assumed you told Wyatt." "I didn't do that." "You know, we learned that now.
I kind of suspected it at the time, too. But at that point, we were up to 3 that we already had to knock off. I figured let's just keep killing everyone who loses as they lose. Everyone agreed, so that's what we did.
I grabbed my leg, pinching it, begging for this just to be another messed up dream of mine, but nothing happened. The lunacy of what he was saying, it was too unreal. So what? Are you going to kill me now? Is that what you're building up to? You're going to prove that I don't matter? He finished his drink and poured himself another one.
Well, they actually want me to make a deal with you. They think it might mean something coming from me. You can go on living, so long as you stay silent. Alternatively, you don't take the deal, and we offer you Leah, Marcus, Marcus's family, Cheyenne, Cheyenne's sisters, and anyone who comes up for this.
There's no way you would get away with that.
Oh, An, you are entirely right. This is the end of the line for us, he said. We can't explain why 7 out of 10 contestants died under mysterious circumstances. I also don't think you would even intend on keeping your word even if you did promise. However, I'm interested in at least seeing this through to the end.
Seeing what to the end?
The competition, An. What else?
I picked up the glass and chucked it at the table, smashing it into pieces in front of us. Peter brought his arm to his face, but none of the glass went flying in his direction.
The hell has gotten into you?
The hell has gotten into me? You murdered 7 people for no reason other than because you could. And now at the end of it, all you care about is not letting me spoil the end of your baking show? Go kick rocks, dude.
Shall I take that as a no, then?
He asked.
Because I'd like to come back to judging for it. I'm sure Marcus and Cheyenne won't object too strongly, but I expect you to be more of a wild card.
I just stared blankly at him. I thought about leaping over the table and grabbing him by the neck and throttling him and attempting to kill him then and there. It was no use, though. I was a dainty young woman, and he, despite his age, was still a sizable man who was not going to be brought down by my hands. Not unarmed, anyhow. Click. An idea triggered in my head. Yeah, let's do it. Let's finish this thing, I said.
Oh, really? That's brilliant.
Not so fast. You have your twisted game going on, but here's mine. The second I get an opening, I'm going to take a kitchen knife to your throat. Just a little something for you to know, so that if you want to judge the competition, you get to live with just a little slice of the anxiety and dread you've put me through all this past week. His head bobbed back and forth as he thought about it.
Sounds reasonable. Don't think you're going to have much of a chance now that you told me, but it's a nice start for your first attempt. Maybe we could have you come back on and workshop some ideas with us. I think you'd look good in a mask.
I simply grimaced and gave him a thumbs up and walked out of the cabin. I marched over to the production office and walked right through the front door. Eyes stared over me as I cheerily walked in and paid them no mind at all. I walked up to the people unloading boxes of ingredients. Hey, is it too late for me to make a substitution to what I'm making for my challenge tomorrow? They looked at me curiously and told me no. I explained to them what I wanted to make instead, gave them a list of all the ingredients I would need. Nothing was too out of the ordinary, so they saw no reason they would not be able to have everything needed come morning. I started to walk back towards my cabin, humming and holding my head high as I thought through what I would do tomorrow. These thoughts were interrupted as I saw Cheyenne waiting outside my cabin. What are you doing here? I said, being intentionally unpleasant. She looked at me with an expression that just made her seem genuinely hurt, and for a moment I felt bad for being so mean to her. Just a moment, though. Afterwards, I remembered that this was Cheyenne I was dealing with after all. The affair-haver, competition cheater, an overall rude person to be near. She seemed to brush off my brash behavior. Can we talk inside? She asked. I'm a little nervous to say this out in the open. Her voice was low as a whisper. I nodded my head and opened the door, and let her in behind me. I closed the door, checked the windows to see if anyone was nearby. There was no one. I tried to comb over the room for any obvious recording devices, but I had to accept I would not be able to find them. I turned to her. She seemed perplexed by my behavior, but proceeded as I nodded. Something's not right here, is it? She asked. There's something terribly awful going on, isn't there? You could say that, I said. What should make me think you're not in on it? She looked terribly offended by this. I'm not. I was messing around with Peter, and I was using it to get ahead in the competition, but whatever this is, well, I think I'm in way over my head. I don't know what's going on, but I know it has something to do with you. It has nothing to do with me. What gave you that idea? It was Peter. During our time together, the longer it went on, the less he was focused on me and the more he kept mentioning you. You made him so angry from that very first day. All he could talk about is how he hated you and you were ruining everything. It got so disturbing that I called it off with him. That made him angrier. He said I would regret this and I was going to suffer the same fate as you. Her eyes started to well up. What does that mean? What is he going to do to us? I stared at her. I studied her with an intensity, searching for any sign of duplicity or anything that would let me know she was sent here on Peter's behalf. With Dylan and Samantha gone, I no longer trusted anyone here, certainly not her. Still, it was hard for me to keep up the animosity with how easily her tears rolled down her face. If she was acting, she was dang good at it. He's not going to do anything to us, I said. How are you so sure? Because I'm going to stop him, and you're going to help me. Her eyes widened. How am I going to help you? I don't know what's going on. I tapped my forehead and interrupted her. That's going to make it much easier for you, I said. All I need for you to do is wait for my signal. I'm going to yawn loudly and stretch out my arms a ridiculous amount. When you see that, I just need you to make a scene. I don't care what. As a matter of fact, don't even tell me what. Just do it and make it big and impossible to look away from. Can you do that? She nodded. Perfect. Now don't you worry about a single thing. You get back to your cabin, get a good day's worth of rest, and I'll see you tomorrow. She seemed nervous and clearly wanted to ask more, but after a moment of deliberation, she obeyed my command and left my cabin to go back towards her own. I laid on my bed. In my mind, I was still unsure if I could trust her. However, if I was backed into a corner and had no other options, I would use that signal as a last resort. Let me get one last shot at Peter Broadway if it came to it. The next day, I sprung out of bed like an Olympic gymnast. There was an ever-present pep in my step, and my voice had a hum to it as I made my way out and into the lodge. I was practically skipping as I made my way into the audio tech room. I saw the lady who told me about the mask a while back, and waved to her politely. Well, aren't you in a chipper mood today? She said to me. I sure am. I've dreamt of this day for years, after all. Finals of the wonderful baking lodge. Her voice lowered. You really think you're going to be able to kill him? Think? I don't think anymore, I said. I just know I am. Well, let's see how that mask fits you. She smiled a bit as she finished hooking me up. The thought of this almost seemed to excite her. 2 days ago, I would have questioned whether or not this was because she wanted freedom, or if because she was just a freak who liked getting people killed. None of that mattered anymore. Nothing seemed to matter, except for one thing. I walked into the challenge area. Marcus and Cheyenne were already there. Hotshot, you better give it your all today, Marcus said. Oh, you know I will. That's the spirit. Good luck, Cheyenne, I said. She twisted her mouth a bit. Yeah, good luck to you too, I guess. The judges and hosts walked in for the last time. The camera crew signaled in the background that they were ready for them to start. Bakers, we are so excited to have the three of you here for the finals, Thomas said. It's been a long road, but everything comes to an end today. Yep, if I can help it, it does. The judges aren't interested in any flair or theme today, Bahama continued. Your best, most delicious, and most beautiful bakes are the center of your challenge today. So, without any further delay, 3, 2, 1, bake. I started to get my bowls and ingredients organized and out into the open. I was suddenly flanked on all sides by production assistants, audio techs, and idle camera people. I glared at them as they seemed to be moving things around from me. I started losing my patience and pushing back on them. They seemed to subside after that. Hello there, An, Peter said. Tell us about your best bake. I looked around to see that every sharp object on my table was in the hands of production teams standing just out of camera shot as the judges came over to make conversation with me. I looked briefly at the glassware. One good smash and a shard could just be exactly what I needed. No, now was not the time. There was a whole counter in between him and me, plus every single person in production was ready to tackle me. I would be patient for a better moment. Earth to An, are you in there? Tama asked. Oh yeah, sorry, I said. I'm making an apple walnut cake. Peter raised his eyebrow. Penelope leaned in and asked a question. Yes, I heard you had made a last-minute switch. I was a bit surprised. You've stuck to your guns this whole competition with your Vietnamese flavors and recipes. This seems a little out of left field? I agree, Peter said. It's also a rather simple bake for the final. What was your thinking? This was one of the first cakes I ever made. It's true that it's not a traditional Vietnamese bake by any means, but it still means a lot to me, and people really like it. Plus, my other recipe wasn't a cake at all, and Slicing through a cake. I bit my lip. Well, there's really nothing like it. Peter grimaced just the slightest second before catching himself. I saw him nervously eye the production team.
Well, best of luck to you,
Penelope said. They moved on to the next table. Once they were a good distance away, I had my knives returned to me. I went back to milling over my cake and setting everything up, coring my apples. I figured working as diligently as possible on my baking was the best way to convince them to drop their guard for a second. There was a kind of thrill to this that I wasn't expecting. This power they must have reveled in, holding the life of someone in their hands. I reveled in it too, but only in as far as I was excited to both make them pay and make them unable to do this ever again. They made their way past Cheyenne and back around to Marcus. The way they framed the cameras left Peter slightly to the right, close to me. The production team still kept a barrier of their own bodies between me and him. I made my next move. I separated all the cores from the apples and put them into a food processor. I turned it on high and blitzed them down into a paste. Oh, what the hell? I'm slipping. I meant to put the apples in here, I said performatively. I poured the paste out into a bowl and then started carrying the bowl over towards the other side of the kitchen. I brushed past the staff and almost got to Peter before Bahama basically body-checked me and almost knocked me onto my butt. What do you think you're doing? He asked. Do you think I wouldn't see that paring knife at the bottom of that bowl? I growled lowly. Why are you getting in my way? I tried to push past him, but he stopped me. Even if he had not, it was no use now because the production team was back on high alert, and even Peter seemed to be inconspicuously trying to check his periphery. Bahama leaned in and whispered, We all go down if you do this. You're all going down one way or another. Even he knows it, I said, nearly shaking with frustration. Besides, you all made yourselves complicit in this a long time ago. It's time to face the consequences. Bahama shook his head. Not as long as there's a chance. We'll keep fighting as long as that exists. Well, so will I. Finding it useless, I went back to my station. From then on out, Peter remained on the sidelines of the competition, not doing his normal rounds of observing the bakers up close. He looked to try to get up a couple of times over towards my direction, but the producers who flanked him seemed to try and talk him out of it. At one point, he looked irate to be told what to do by them and almost just marched over. I was ready. Kitchen knife within just an instant's reach. Tama intercepted him. She looked back between him and me and seemed to quietly, desperately plead for him not to risk it. He went to sit back down, but I could tell it was killing him. It was having the same effect on me, but I tried to do a better job of hiding it. The minutes turned to hours, and before we knew it, we were in the final 30 minutes of the competition. It was now or never. I turned back to Cheyenne. She looked at me expectantly. I stretched my arms out over my head and yawned. Without hesitation, I watched as she slammed a knife onto the table. Ow, my thumb! I think I cut my thumb off, she screamed. There was a burst of red liquid that almost made me jump before I was able to tell that she punctured a bag of red icing she had prepared, seeming to have deliberately made a first attempt that ended up being too runny. I had been unsure if I could really rely on her, but she left me no doubts here. The production team scrambled. I gave them a moment and then took the time to add a special ingredient to my cake. Then, once they were clearly focused on Cheyenne and not me, I started to make a move towards Peter. He chuckled and stepped back out of the challenge area, like that was going to stop me. I charged after him, but as I exited the kitchen, I felt a searing shock of electricity burn into me along my back, along the exact line where my audio equipment ran. I stepped back, briefly getting a relief from the hidden high-voltage dog collar that was trapped around me. I looked up at him. The most arrogant and obnoxious grin was on his face.
It was really delightful thinking you had any chance of winning, he said. This whole thing was rigged from the start. Did you really think you could stop me when it mattered most?
I scowled at him. I thought about charging again, but my body could not withstand that shock one more time. To think that he did not even bother to wait until I had officially lost to strap me to that equipment. For how many times I had my audio set up on me, I was kicking myself for not realizing how much heavier it was today. I looked down and returned to my station. The production team had confirmed that Cheyenne's finger was attached, and the blood was actually icing. I put the final touches on my cake before time was called. I looked so defeated, so disenfranchised. My dread only continued as the judges came up to my station. They eyed my cake very carefully. It looked mostly good. My flagrant lie that I had made it all the time would almost be believable if it were not for one portion of the cake that seemed to be soggy, almost, with something.
Oh, what do we have here?
Peter said. He pulled the cake over and used one of my confiscated knives to cut himself a slice of that exact spot, and then took a fork to it.
You're so cruel going after the only unappetizing slice, Penelope said.
He brought the bite to his face and chewed on it. His face contorted as he finished chewing and barely managed to swallow the piece.
Gosh, that is right awful,
he said.
I never thought a cake could taste so bitter.
No, there's no way, I said. Try it again. You must have gotten a bad spot. He chuckled, looking at me as I seemed to cling to the thing that mattered least in this deadly baking show, which was the actual baking. He did it as I said, and had another bite. Same results as the first one.
Nope. Sorry, Ann. This is downright pitiful.
That's such a shame, because I made it special for you. Peter's smile went away instantly. He turned to the others.
What does she mean by that? Did she poison the cake?
He asked frantically.
No, there's no way,
Bahama said.
She was searched while getting equipped. She had nothing on her. What are both of you going on about?
Penelope asked. I stifled a laugh. That's right, you idiots, I wanted to say out loud, but I kept everything to myself. Everything I needed was right in here. That little mistake I made grinding the apple cores, the quick secret ingredient I added during Cheyenne's stunt, all of that was part of my plan to pump the ugliest slice of cake full of natural cyanide to take you out. All I had to do was keep my poker face on until there was no chance to reverse it. He was sweating profusely as he examined the cake. His face was bright red, and I could see him struggling to confirm whether or not what he ate was okay. The camera crew seemed to look to one another, confused, all while I did everything I could just to not burst out laughing. He ran over to the corner of the room, near a trash bin, and tried to induce vomiting. In that instant, I snatched the knife he dropped and started to run after him, ready to plunge it deep into him. I stopped only because of someone who jumped in my way.
No, wait, stop it.
I skid, unable to stop, but dropped the knife right before sliding into Dylan. I gasped and looked around in panicked confusion. What? You're alive?
Shame on all of you. You took this way too far. This was supposed to stop before the finals.
Samantha came out from the hallway. At this point, I was completely speechless.
Guess the jig is up, Marcus said. Peter, man, it's all right. She ground up apple cores and injected it into the cake. There's not enough cyanide in 2 bites of that to kill you. Are you sure?
He asked, looking desperate. Yeah, you moron, and it serves you right, Leah said, walking in. Oh gosh, Ann, you look like a mess. She hugged me tight, and once again I started crying. I wanted so anxiously to know what was going on, but no one seemed to tell me. I held on to Leah tightly. In this moment, she felt like the only thing that I was absolutely certain was real. I'm so sorry, dear. I had no idea this was happening. They told me as soon as I pulled up, and then started showing me the footage. I was so horrified I marched right in here to stop it. They tried to stop me, but your 2 friends back there demanded we get through. Stop? What? The murders? How is everybody? I sputtered in between sobs. There were no murders on, Dylan said. You're not on Wonderful Baking Lodge. You missed it on the sign-up and forms, but this was meant to be a 1-season spin-off reality TV show called Horrifying Baking Lodge. All the contestants have been actors, all the production team in on it. I heaved heavily, my shock and distress turning into rage and resentment. You're all monsters. I could have really killed him. I turned to Cheyenne. You knew all of this and were going to help me kill him? Not really, she said and held up a clicker in her hand. I was going to give you a zap before you got too close. When I saw the other night how distressed you were, I decided then and there I was going to let you scare him as much as you needed.
That's fair, honestly, Peter said. I'm sorry, Ann. If you want to truly blame someone, it lies on me. It was my idea to even raise the stakes for this last challenge by arranging that chat with you. My craft, aside from baking, has always been to deliver riveting television, and when I saw the pure fear you were giving and how it perfectly played into TV, I just couldn't stop raising the stakes. I needed to push it as far as it could go.
I paused for a really long time, as everyone stared, waiting for my response. Holy guacamole, I think I still might want to kill you. Though I was completely serious, everyone around laughed as if it was the funniest thing they had ever heard. Even Leah had to stifle a chuckle, and only turned her face back to being serious when I glared at her. They all had amused faces that made me so irritated. Then I looked at Penelope, who seemed absolutely dumbstruck. And you? I asked. I can't believe you did this to me. You've always seemed so sweet. She paused and stammered a moment.
I have no idea what's going on. Yeah, no, Peter said. The part about her not being in on it was completely true. She's now even less in the loop than you are. It was easier that way. She's a much better baker than an actress. Why you?
She grabbed my less than lethal apple walnut cake and smashed it in his face. He spit out chunks of cake and wiped it away from his eyes eagerly.
Oh, please, someone tell us we were rolling for that,
Peter said. A camera operator gave the thumbs up. Everyone started laughing again, and after a little bit of time, the relief finally fully setting in, I had to start laughing too. Leah smiled and hugged me tight. Dylan and Samantha came over and gave me cautious pats on the shoulder, as I still gave each of them the stink eye as they got close. All right, I'm going to need to see that footage, I said. It better be the best dang thing I've ever seen, or all of you just put me through hell for nothing.
Yeah, and we get final say if you can use it at all, Leah said. I don't care if you have a paper with her name on it saying she signed her life away.
I think you'll come to find that footage is electrifying, Bahama said. I grabbed the cake off of Marcus's table and started running after him with it as he had already had the foresight to start running away down the hallway. And thus concludes the most insanely terrifying and somewhat cosmically hilarious situation of my entire life. I got to live my dream of begging for Peter and Penelope in the lodge, while also living out my worst nightmare of thinking any solitary moment could end up being my last. That was my story in the wonderful baking lodge. Thank you so much for listening to Wonderful Baking Lodge. If you enjoyed, please rate the podcast on the app, give it a like on YouTube, and share with anyone who you think might also enjoy. This idea, like most of mine, was truly meant to be a short story, but as I kept pulling the thread, I got obsessed with raising the stakes and absurdity. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did putting it together. Next Monday, it's another one of our post-series bye weeks, where instead of a full episode, you'll get to see a teaser trailer for the next series. It's called Fun Facts and Psychic Possession Attacks, a deliberate mouthful of a name. I really don't know what to say about this next one without taking away from the trailer, other than it might be the single most I ever enjoyed writing a story. I hope you tune in to learn more. Wonderful Baking Lodge is a D-Squared Stories production. You can stay up to date with Wonderful Baking Lodge and all future D-Squared Stories productions by finding us on social media. That'll be D-Squared Stories across just about any of the big platforms. I appreciate you listening and hope to have you listen again next week.